Good afternoon. Let me start the meeting, NRA's meeting with the international advisors. We have once or twice a year, we have the international meeting with the advisors once or twice a year, but we has not have enough numbers of meeting due to the pandemic. And we met each other, last time we met each other November 25 in online meeting. And in-person meeting, as far as I know, we had a meeting in November 2019. So it's almost 2.5 years. But well, quite fortunately, we have a meeting together today. And in this morning and afternoon, NRA staff and some of the commissioners already give an explanation regarding the discharge of an Alps treated water and security breaches, recent security issues happened in Japan. And also we have, we show the written material regarding our concern about our participations to the conventions. So in the beginning, could you let us have just a few words from each commissioners, each advisors, Mr. Mizurov, Mr. Jame, and Ms. Drabova, please.
Thank you, Chairman Fikeda. It's very pleasant to be here. It's been a long time, and for me, this has been the first international travel I have taken since February of 2020. So this was a resumption of old habits to come back here. And it's very good to see you and your colleagues yet again. The way we propose to proceed is that we've divided up the three topics among the three of us. I will talk about the Alps situation. Dana will talk about security, and then the other topic having to do with conventions and how the NRA might optimize its learning from them will be covered initially by Mr. Jame. Although all of us would be prepared to answer questions on any of the topics that may be of particular interest, and there may be some things from our earlier meetings that would be relevant. But before we get started, let me turn to my colleagues, as you suggested, to see if they would like to make any opening remarks.
Thank you very much, Chairman Fuketa, and thanks also to all your staff involved in organizing this meeting. It was not easy, I can imagine, but me personally, I am really pleased to be back to Japan and Tokyo and to have the possibility to discuss with you in person. So I'm looking forward to this discussion in the open meeting.
Well, as the other, I want to thank you very much for giving us the opportunity to see you again. You look good, so that's the first good news of this meeting. And we had good discussions this afternoon, so I hope we can summarize them in a good and useful fashion. Thank you very much.
Should I start with the discussion of the Alps issue?
Yes, please.
Thank you. As you know, this is a subject in which you asked for some written input from us, and so we have submitted some written comments to you about the proposal by TEPCO to release the water that is accumulated at the Fukushima Daiichi site. And our discussions today largely were to discuss events that have occurred since we submitted our reports, which I understand have been summarized in comments by the various commissioners have been released to the public. So that's the backdrop for my comments. Of course, we are all very aware that TEPCO has submitted a variety of plans for the release of the water. They intend to clean up the water using the ALPS cleanup system to remove most of the radionuclides. That system will not touch the tritium, so that the cleanup will be to to remove the radionuclides to well below drinking water standards, then dilute the water in seawater so that, as the water is released will be well below drinking water standards as well, not only for tritium but for the accumulated radionuclides that are present in what's released. It will be released, as I understand it, in a tunnel that is going to be dug deep under the ocean and released about a kilometer or so offshore into a restricted area, where of course it'll be further diluted in the seawater. Since we have met, TEPCO has provided a dose assessment of the effects of the release and demonstrated that concluded in that document that all of the safety standards would be adequately dealt with, in fact, be well below any levels of health concern from the release. Engineering details have been submitted, and I understand there's more to be submitted. Sampling plan, there's a whole series of plans that need to be in place before the release of the water could take place, and I know that's subject to NRA jurisdiction. My understanding is that NRA is contemplating the possibility of an interim decision that might result in, after your internal discussions, in the release of a report, perhaps in the summer of this year, reflecting your tentative views of the matter. That will be released for public comment, and then a decision, of course, will follow after the comment period. So overall, I must say, as we had reported in the written comments we submitted, that the plan looks on its face to be very reassuring and very protective. There are many matters that remain to be resolved that are ahead of you, but we believe that you're in a situation where at least an initial decision about the propriety of the plan after public comment is now appropriate, subject, of course, to the completion of the satisfactory demonstration of all the other details. Since we spoke with you, there has been an IAEA assessment of the consequences of the release. It is generally very supportive of the work that TEPCO has done, although it did raise a series of technical matters, which its assessment would suggest are not going to seriously affect the bottom line, but obviously need to be correct. And they include some things about inclusion of further radionuclides in the source term, some possibilities about the bioaccumulation in the environment, the determination of committed dose, and so forth. All of those matters need to be done and need to be done correctly, but you're so far below regulatory limits that it would seem unlikely that it's going to change the bottom line, but obviously you need to have a technically correct document before any final decisions are made to allow the project to proceed. I don't think that should foreclose the interim decision that you're contemplating, because I think you know enough now, subject to all of these other reports being submitted. I understand as well that the IAEA will be doing an assessment of the regulatory situation, and there'll be a further report to you, I understand, perhaps in the June timeframe. That would also be very useful to you, obviously, as part of your process going forward as you contemplate a decision as to whether to give approval. But overall, I want to say that the situation is as we originally assessed it in our written comments, that this seems on its face to be very protective of the public health and safety. You definitely need to release this water. You have a dangerous situation that's evolving as some of these tanks get older, and the water has to be handled in some fashion, and the release of it under a protective way to proceed seems to us to be a sensible way to approach a very difficult issue. Let me say, however, that there is a very important process here. Not only does this need to meet the technical constraints, about making sure that this meets the regulatory requirements and is protective of the public health and safety. But it's important to build the trust of the Japanese public that this is something that has been seriously examined in a way that they're confident that the decision is a correct way to proceed. And that's a very difficult challenge. The process of getting public comment, of course, is important, but you should recognize, as I'm sure you do, that you not only need to talk to the public about what your assessment is and the conclusions you've drawn and the basis for them, you need to listen as well. You need to hear what their concerns are. To the extent it's possible, you should try to make sure that you address their concerns, because ultimately the public needs to be satisfied, not only that this is a technical review, but that their concerns have been addressed. And so that can involve many issues, and some of them, of course, are difficult, like reputational issues associated with the release of the water to the people in the area, particularly the fishermen. It does raise to me a broader issue, which I think with which the NRA has to grapple. And that is, on this issue and on many others, I think it would be very helpful for you to do what you can to cultivate skills among the community that is or could be critical of the nuclear industry to engage in your processes with you. There's a great benefit for you of having not only the technically sound presentations from industry that your staff is reviewing, but to have a critical eye as well on them that not only brought to their submissions by the staff, but also by outside organizations. That will help. It not only can lead to better decisions by you and that you have a fuller exploration of the technical issues, but that also could help build trust among the public that you've heard the concerns by people who really know something about the issues. And I realize that you may not have that community existing in Japan today, but if there's a way you can encourage it, it would seem to me to be helpful not only for the public, but for you and your processes, and ultimately helpful to the industry, in that they're really dependent on the trust that the public has in the NRA. And anything that builds that trust is useful to you, to the public, and ultimately to them, although they may not always understand that. It does seem to me that I should add that having such an NGO has been very important to the NRC in the United States. And I'm, as you know, a former chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. And we had many issues that were presented to us that were controversial, presented by the nuclear industry. And it was very helpful to have a knowledgeable NGO who could engage on the technical issues that were before us. You know, that coming in and hearing that people were against a proposal was of value, but it's not as much of value as something that engages at a technical level on the details of what can be demonstrated within your rules as being needed to guide a decision. We had the Union of Concerned Scientists, for example, in the US, which plays that role effectively and is very helpful in the decision processes. And when I was at the NRC, I very much encouraged the UCS to play that role. And I think it would be helpful for the NRA to have a similar entity or entities that are engaged with you. So that completes my report on the ALPS. You may have some questions, or perhaps my colleagues would like to add some thoughts that reflect their own deliberations.
Yeah, I just want to mention in line with what Richard said, is that also in France, the ASN has contributed to help the formation, training, and emergence of some experts that belong to NGO. And doing this, the purpose was not to convince them that nuclear was fine. You know, we respect their opinion that they don't like nuclear. But the most important thing is that we established a technical link or a bridge to have conversation with them on rational subject rather than sticking to emotional subject that is very often the content of public reactions.
Well, Richard used exactly right word, cultivate. You said cultivate community. Well, I felt that it's practically how we can cultivate. I mean, it's not the government or NRA built the community or the NGO, but the support. You know, Phillips also said ASN support to create the entity. My question is how we can cultivate it. I mean, we propose to an establishment of the NGO or to financially support or to give them an opportunity to discuss. What is the right way or any recommended way to cultivate?
Well, it's an interesting question. In the United States, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission would be foreclosed by law from actually financially supporting an organization that appeared either for or against a given licensing proposal. So that would not be something that's allowed even by law. We did cultivate such a community that I informally made sure that the head of the Union of Concerned Scientists knew how much I appreciated their participation. And I, in fact, encouraged it because frequently when we had a public meeting, we would have a panel that might involve industry, we'd have another panel that might involve critics, and a third panel that involved the staff. And I think inviting people who can engage, if there are any, who can engage at a technical level and inviting them to participate, encouraging them to participate, not by paying them, by letting them know you want to listen to them, that you help to build a development of that. And perhaps even this meeting is a way to make NGOs, if they're watching, understand that they would be welcomed to engage with you. And if I think about it, if there's anything else that I can think of that might encourage this, but I think it's important to let that people in that community understand that you would welcome their participation. It would be particularly helpful if they were knowledgeable and could engage with you on a technical level, at the level at which your decisions are made. That's a critical element. It's easy to find people who are for or against a given proposition. What you need are people who can engage on the substance, and need to find such people and invite them to participate with you.
Yes, I understand. But for example, is there any criticism on UCS that the organization may be manipulated by the government, or I presume there might be such kind of the criticism even on UCS.
Well, I think there may be criticism, but you could help to defend against it by having people who are the critics speak to you, and then you make reasoned decisions to explain why you've made your decisions that responds to the comments. Maybe you agree with them on occasion. And it's important and be helpful to you, I think, to have the public see that you're trying to find the right approach, and you'll listen to anyone who can help you get to the right decision.
Yes, that is very interesting, and it's good to know about it, because when we speak about the communication with the industries, I often said like NEI, like organization, is helpful for the communication between a regulatory body and the industries. And Japanese industry created Athena, which is Japan's version of the NEI. And that, well, it's getting much better in terms of the communication between NRA and the industries due to the creation of the antenna. And probably the communication between the NRA and the general public, like a UCS-like organization, could be helpful, but still I'm wondering how do we proceed and how do we cultivate. We need to cultivate the background anyway, and also we need to create a system to have a contact with them. But generally speaking, it sounds very good to have such not opponent, but someone to have a dialogue on concerned issues. Yes, thank you.
I agree with you that I don't have an easy solution of how to do it, but if there's a way that you can nudge things in that direction, I think it would end up being helpful to you.
Is UCS spontaneously built, or is there any? Because as far as I heard, some faculty members and students in MIT first create UCS.
I must admit I'm not deeply knowledgeable of the history. I believe that it, in fact, grew out of a group that had major concerns about nuclear weapons and had great technical skills based on an MIT origin on issues related to nuclear weapons. And that evolved because of competence on nuclear issues more generally. And of course, and I think they still are very actively involved in nuclear weapons issues, but they do have a component that works on nuclear safety issues as well. And there are other organizations. I mean, the Nuclear Resources Defense Council, as well, is a very competent environmental organization. They occasionally get involved in nuclear issues. They generally are opponents to industry, but they're competent as well. They don't engage anywhere as much on the detailed regulatory side as in litigation in the courts on issues that are nuclear related. But there are several organizations that I think could already may express as an environmental organization, may express some concerns about nuclear power plants, and having some of them understand that you would welcome their participation in your process, that your decision making would be helped by hearing their views, with the understanding that it'd be particularly helpful if it reflects some technical engagement with the sorts of issues with which you're grappling, that may be a way to build out of an existing organization that has a different focus today and have them add a dimension to it.
Philip.
Yeah, two little points. First, ASN cannot, of course, finance any NGO directly, but we found possibilities like invite them to follow for free some training sessions we had. So this is maybe a trick, but this worked. The second thing is that I fully agree with Richard that inviting them to some committees or public meeting is a very good way, because it shows to them that they are recognized, that they are part of a decision, and this is a very strong motivation also for them to acquire the necessary knowledge to have more and more weight in such participation. So the strategy of the invitation seems to me a very good one.
I should add one thing that I want to be clear is that UCS is not always an opponent of industry proposals. If it thinks something they're proposing is a good idea, it'll say so.
That's important.
And they don't come in as knee-jerk for or against anything. They try to give you a reasoned basis for a decision, and sometimes it's contrary to the industry view, and sometimes it's in favor of what the industry is proposing.
Yeah, if I may, I think that starting with trying to invite some representatives of NGOs to some of your meetings or trainings or something like that is a very good beginning, because with this contact with them you can also assess who is opponent and who is constructive opponent. That means constructive opponent for me is the one that puts very unpleasant questions, but is also willing to listen to your answer and think about what you are saying. This is a really constructive opponent.
Well, thank you. Constructive is a key. I mean, not destructive, but constructive. Yeah. Any questions from commissioners?
So how long have you tried to construct a trust relationship between public and NRC?
Well, I don't know when it started, but during my term as the chairman of the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, which was from 1999 to 2003, there was an established role for UCS as a frequent participant in our processes. We had a very knowledgeable staff person, was a single person, who would provide informed insights on our decisions. Of course, we didn't always agree with him, but frequently it was very helpful to have a discussion. So it existed over 20 years ago, and I don't know when it started, but it pre-existed my term. And
please be aware that this is a never-ending story, this cultivating a mutual relationship, because people are changing their position, there is a generation shift, and so on, so on. So you start, you believe you will be successful and you will have constructive opponents, but you need to work on it constantly.
Yeah, I think such a public communication data such as UCS is very important. And also, I think it depends on the culture, your countries. So by the culture of countries, the system is changing. So maybe you don't know so much about the Japanese culture. So if you know something about the Japanese style or culture, you have some advice more to make public communication.
Yeah. Let me say, I'm making observations, the suggestions to you, and I reflect, as interested as I am in the Japanese culture and legal system and your regulatory system, I can't claim to be deeply knowledgeable about what would work here. My sense is that it would be valuable to find some way to have some counterweight to the industry, but how that would work best within your system, I can't advise you really with any depth of knowledge.
Any question, comment? Go ahead.
Just want to say one thing. The point is to involve parties other than industries and regulatory bodies for better communication, for better discussion, I think. So if that involvement doesn't lead to better discussion, it doesn't make sense. And the concrete way will depend on social environment, culture, and so forth. So we need to find a way to improve our discussion, our communication with society. And there are efforts being done by many other countries. So we can learn from the practice from other countries.
I'm sure that's correct. You ought to take the information from different cultures and make a decision as to what is likely to help in Japan.
And then how about the role of the media or journalism in the context of the communications? Well, there is a big profile of the media in this kind of the communications. So you have the public meeting inviting the, for example, UCS. But at the case, is there any participation from the media or any?
Well, the answer is, of course, there is. There is various types of press, I'm sure in Japan as in the United States. There is a technical press that publishes just about for basically the nuclear community that follows events at the NRC and around the world. And we've interacted sometimes when they have something about Japan, and I forwarded it to you. So there's a technical press, and they usually themselves are knowledgeable and try to do a fair job. There's the major press that as well, and they can fall into various categories. Some of them can be very anti-nuclear, some of them pro-nuclear, and that's unfortunately a dimension of our culture these days where some issues get divided because of a political spectrum we're in. That's not so true as in the United States as it is in some other countries, actually. But it does raise the issue. I think it's important. Not only do you want to cultivate knowledgeable interlocutors, but it would help you to have knowledgeable press. Now, obviously, with a free press, you don't have the capacity to control what they write, but it might be possible for you to find ways to educate them so that they understand the issues in a way that they can write with some sophistication. Now, whether there is a role that you could have in occasional seminars or discussions with the press to try to educate them on sort of basic issues. It might be possible, for example, with regard to this document that the IEA had reviewed, that the health effects document prepared by TEPCO, is to have some effort to educate the press about what that is involved, so at least they understand it in a way they might not otherwise. And of course, you need to be available to answer their questions, and to give them. It's part of the transparency that I think is very important. And you answer the questions. You can't control what they're going to write, but nonetheless, I think doing the best you can to inform the press, so at least there's a possibility that they could write a balanced article, is the best you can do. And you ought to think of that as part of your obligations, is to make sure you're responsive to press inquiries.
Well, thank you. Sounds quite interesting, and let me think about the educational or seminar course for the media, and I really would like to have a balanced article regarding in the controversial issues. There are a number of controversial issues. So, okay, so. Well, thank you very much for your comments, and let me turn into the second topics. Okay.
The security topics.
Security topics. Second topics. So
okay. It will be my pleasure to try to summarize our discussion on the second topic we had on our agenda for today's meeting. This topic concerned the physical protection incidents on TEPCO's Kashiwazaki-Kariwa nuclear power station in 2020. We, as advisors, were informed already last year, and we were asked also for our comments or advice, and some of us provided also written comments. The discussion today touched two broad areas. One was the substance of incident, and also the assessment of the response of NRA to this incident. This was in fact the easier one, but I won't go too much into detail because we are in a very sensitive topic. Security is always a very sensitive topic. I will comment it later on. What we found out, what concerns the response of NRA staff to this incident, from our point of view, it's adequate. That means the intensified inspection effort and the request for compensatory measures, and still the inspection effort continues on Kashiwazaki Karewa nuclear power station. So from this point of view, there is not much to advise the NRA staff on. Nevertheless, as I have mentioned a minute ago, we are really in a very sensitive area, and there is and always will be, and we come back again to public communication and public trust. There always will be a dilemma between transparency and technical details on security events on nuclear power plants. In Czech Republic, as well as in the USA and France, it's common practice only to announce there was a security incident, the reaction of regulatory bodies such and such, and for understandable reasons we cannot provide public technical details because it could mean bigger risk from the point of view of disclosure of security measures at the installation. So your role again is not easy. It's a tricky one to find trust-building measures that if you announce as a regulator there was a security incident, it was being handled appropriately, and the reaction of regulator is such and such, the public will accept it. Not easy, but we also discussed probably useful trust building tools that can regulatory authority help in this not easy task. One is to use international peer reviews on physical protection. There is a very good advisory service by the IAEA called IPAS, or International Physical Protection Advisory Service. I can share with you small experience from the Czech Republic. We hosted IPAS mission last autumn, and it was after 15 years since the last such mission, and it was a very useful discussion, and also we obtain, as from every mission, small number of recommendations and small number of suggestions for our next steps. So if you found it useful, the IPAS mission is really a very good tool. Of course, the report is not open to public as a whole, but there are summary parts that the public can see the overall level of physical protection of nuclear installations in the country. And the second thing we have rather good experience with is so-called force-on-force exercise at nuclear power plants. What does it mean, force-on-force exercise? Governmental security forces test in real exercise, not the tabletop, real exercise, the arrangement and resilience of the physical protection at the nuclear power plant. Again, the results cannot be disclosed to the public in full detail, but the summary could be made available. So this was what we discussed under the topic 2 of our agenda, that means physical protection, and also a small piece of advice from us. Thank you very much.
I might just add one point in addition to the things that Dana had covered. As she indicated, we had filed some written responses on the security issues. We did have a very helpful discussion this morning with Commissioner Mann, who raised the important point that one of the obvious concerns one has at the KK plant would be whether the problems that existed there, which were significant, were only in the security area, but did it manifest possible problems in other areas, such as the safety issues, and was there same lax behavior with regard to safety? And then a second set of questions about whether the security problem at KK was endemic of a problem at other TEPCO plants, or was it something that was even more terrible to think about, common across the industry? And those are the right questions. Those are very important questions, to look beyond the given incident, to look at what the possible implications are. And I, for one, was very pleased that that the NRA has been looking at this issue. And I won't, my understanding, this is a matter of review that is still underway. Basically, you have some comfort from what you learned to date, but that this is the fact that there were follow-on issues beyond what we submitted to you that you're examining, it, to me, is very reassuring and demonstrates how significantly the NRA understands its role. That look beyond a given incident to see how far the problem goes and running it to ground.
Well, during the discussions on regarding the security breaches in Kashiwazaki-Kariwa recently, well, we had a difficulty to draw the line of the information which can be disclosed to the public or which cannot be. And due to the security issues, well, most of the information cannot be disclosed to the public, but and also the number of the personnel, number of the staff working on the physical protection is limited in NRA, and also the commission itself has a limited chance to access to the security informations. So we have had lots of lessons learned from the recent incident, and also we started having international discussions regarding security, and that was quite helpful. And thank you, Dana. Specifically, two comments. As for the IPAS, well, I know the NLA doesn't understand the value of the review mission provided by the IAEA, and within 2 years, I think, well, I can just say that within 2 years, we plan to have a IPAS mission, and then IRRS mission again. So, but we cannot have both at the same time. So probably the IPAS first, and then IRRS. And second, force on force exercise. Well, first I heard about this practice from Richard, and I went to the website of the NRC, and I read the explanation about force on force. It looks quite interesting, but probably the situation of these two countries are very different, and the success of this practice depends on the level of the NRA staff members. So first we need to learn the practices in international communities, and we may learn lots from the Czech, France, U.S. about drill, this exercise, and we may. Anyway, we need to think about how to educate our staff members to whether or not to do the such exercise in this country.
I think that I completely understand that the precise means by which you provide security could be quite different from that in the United States. In the U.S., we have guards who are employed by the reactor owner that is there to protect, and they are heavily armed. They're given authority to shoot to kill if there is somebody who intrudes on the site. They'll obviously use judgment on whether they do that or not, but I mean, that is very serious security. The important point, I think, is you'd have to adapt what you test. But the important point of a force-on-force is to have some sort of a process where somebody who is not part of the organization is challenging the security system, whatever it is, so that if any vulnerabilities exist, they're working hard to find those vulnerabilities and thereby making the system much stronger than it otherwise would be. And in the case of the U.S., that means a force-on-force, which means a very competent attacking force that is independent of the utility, deeply knowledgeable about how to attack such a facility, and has a variety of tools. That's a real live exercise. That may not be possible everywhere, but at some means you need to have a red team, what we've called in the U.S., that's looking for vulnerabilities, and force-on-force is a very good way for us to find them.
Okay, thank you. Any other question, comments from Ban-san?
So now you talked about the team to make an attack to find vulnerability. So how do you cultivate that kind of team?
Well, we have regulatory requirements that the owner of the plant is required to demonstrate that they can resist an attack that is within the bounds of what is called the design basis threat. And the details of that are not publicly available, but it does involve a team of attackers of a certain number of people with certain kinds of weapons, with certain kinds of explosives, a certain other capability. It involves the possibility that an insider in the plant could assist them in the attack. It's the most difficult thing to be able to deal with as an insider. We've had a situation where we tested where we had the head of the security system in the plant as the insider. That's incredibly difficult to defend when the person who has the responsibility is the one that is creating a problem. But anyway, I just mentioned this to say that the scope of the attack is defined by the system which explains what the licensee's obligation is to be able to defend the plants against a certain kind of attack. And that's details are not public, but it's intended to be difficult.
In Japan, to defend the facility against attackers is not the licensing responsibility, licensing issued. The physical protection is for the before the police or law enforcement arrived at the site. So detection or is one of the responsibility for the licensees, but not defend the facility with the firearms. So that's a clear difference. But you know that we have a big difference between even on the design-based threats. So probably force on force would be very different in different countries.
Well, it would, and of course, attitudes and laws with regard to firearms, very different, unfortunately, in the United States from it is in many other countries, including Japan. That's an unfortunate aspect of our law. But I think that that one of the functions of the defensive system is to delay an attack long enough that external forces can arrive with the capacity to repel it. And that would seem to me in Japan, if you don't have a capacity on site to be able to eliminate the attacking force, a capacity to delay access long enough to keep people from getting to vital equipment in a short time frame ought to be the focus of the defensive system. And that's what you could test with the force on force. Is the system designed so you can delay the attack long enough that an outside police force could arrive to repel?
Yeah, in terms of the delay or the time period to delay the attackers, it's the same as in our licensing process. We have a time period estimation to make a delay for the attack, but it's anyways defined prediction assumption for the calculation of the time period anyway. Yeah.
And of course, it could be different from plant to plant.
Yes.
Just because where the defensive forces are coming from.
Yes.
And what their capabilities are.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you. Go ahead.
So thank you very much. Even for physical protection, information sharing to the public is quite important, I think. And also international peer review is also important for even for the physical protections. I completely agree to your opinion. And I was very surprised the decision making in NRC is quite quick, even for physical protections. So in Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant, an authorized access happened in September 2020. And then the partial loss of physical protection was found in Kashiwazaki Kariwa. Then it takes 6 months to make the decision to ban the transfer of nuclear materials in Kashiwazaki Kariwa. So it takes a long time in NRA. What is the key for quick decision making in NRC for physical protection?
Well, I can't comment with any knowledge about the process inside the NRA and why it took so long. It seems to me the most important thing from the regulatory point of view is that if there's a vulnerability that creates a risk, that it is immediately dealt with. And that might not necessarily, depend on the circumstances, require immediate action with regard to decisions with regard to transfer of nuclear material. It may freeze it in vaults or wherever it is might be sufficient to deal with the security concern for the short term. You know, with the problem would be making sure that immediate problem is physical access to the plant. And is that working equipment in place, or if the equipment is defective, is there effective compensatory measures that would involve people and capacities to fulfill the function of the equipment to deal with the immediate security concern. And so that delay in the transfer of material may not be necessary to deal with the immediate security concern. It may be, but I can't comment. What seems to me what's essential is to deal with the security concern so the vulnerability doesn't persist for long. And in the case of the NRC, if there's a significant security concern, you require compensatory measures to go in place immediately to be able to hold the situation. Equipment might not be fixed immediately, but you'd have some other means to assure that security was intact.
Thank you.
Well, regarding the alternative measures, alternative acts, exactly same we did. I mean, once we knew about the TEPCO's breaches, we require the alternatives. And then we find their alternative measure was not adequate. We require again to have sufficient or adequate protections for the KEPCO. But as for the decision regarding the transfer of the nuclear materials, we took analysis before our decision. So that's what we have. Okay.
Well, as a commissioner mainly responsible for natural hazard, I have to point out one thing for Kashiwazaki-Kariwa problem. Well, for example, the nuclear power plant site of Kashiwazaki-Kariwa was a sand dune before construction. That means there always is a strong wind that carries sand from the sea. And so, for example, the outer protection fence of the nuclear power site are easily buried under sand, That causes big problem on the protection ability of the fence. And also, you don't know the weather in the Japan seaside seashore. There, in winter, there are frequent thunder attack. It doesn't happen in Pacific side, but in the Japan seaside, this winter weather is very severe. And in such situation, the frequent trouble of the electronic facilities, such as, for example, video cameras and so on, may happen. So it is very important to consider natural environment also in the security issues. That's my point.
I certainly have no reason to disagree with that at all. I mean, it seems to me the security system has to be built around an awareness of where its weaknesses are. And, that you have particular challenges there. The licensee needs to figure out how to deal with them, and you need to review them to ensure they're adequate.
Okay, now we'll turn into the last topics. Third, the conventions. And please, Philip.
I forgot. Thank you very much for giving me the floor. So we spent some time discussing about the follow-up inside NRA of the different conventions, CNS, Nuclear Safety Convention, and Joint Convention. I will speak about 3 different points. My first point will be the conventions themselves. Then I will speak a little bit about complementary peer reviews, and I'll try to summarize what were our main recommendations. So let me first talk about the conventions, the Nuclear Safety Convention and Joint Convention. First, you have to mention that those conventions are the highest level instrument in the field of nuclear safety for installation, fuel cycle facilities, spent fuel and waste. So they are extremely important for this reason. Each convention has around 100 countries that have joined them, less for CNS, more for joint convention. And if you look at the way they function, they meet every 3 years. For each meeting, each country has to write a report about the situation in the country. Then each country has to read reports from other countries and formulate questions. And then, I'm simplifying a bit, and then during the meeting, questions are discussed, answers are provided, and the final output of the meeting is a set of conclusions relative to each country, and then conclusions that are broad conclusions at the international level. So what is how can you look at these results from the organization point of view? I think when you look at the results of those conventions, they are extremely general by definition, because when you have 100 countries and you talk at the worldwide level, you cannot expect that you have very precise conclusions for each organization. So I think there are two possible advantages of these conclusions. First, if you have a conclusion relative to your country or an international conclusion that is really important enough so that it needs action, then this is a basis for the Commission to decide that some action should be undertaken at the level of NRA. So this is the first case, you define something, or you identify something really urgent and important. The second output that is, I think, very valuable is that it gives to the Commission, but also to the whole staff, a sort of view of the global international background. What are the new problems identified? What are the main concerns, and so on. But as I said, this is still not very precise, and it's more a background information, but it's very useful that it is disseminated to the management and also to the staff so that they have a better view of the international background. Now, let me go to my second point, which are the complementary peer reviews. I've insisted on the fact that of the importance, but also the limitations of the conventions. So as complementary peer reviews, you have the peer reviews of the IAEA that you know very well, and the main one for a regulatory body is the IRS and the Artemis missions. So the big difference with the convention is that those two, or there are others, but I mentioned the two, is that they only deal with one country. The process is a bit similar. The country has to make a self-assessment, produce a report, send this to the IAEA that assembles a team of international experts. One of the differences is that the purpose of such a review is to check the regulatory system in the country and the practices of the regulator with reference to the international IAEA safety standards. And the second thing is that, of course, the suggestion and recommendation that are formulated are very specific and are very much operational. And in addition to this, after a peer review, you have a follow-up, I think it's 1 or 3 years, I don't remember, afterwards, that comes and checks how they were implemented. So from a purely operational point of view, I would say that those IRS mission or Artemis mission are extremely important because they are the more operational and motivative for the organization. So as a general conclusion, we had two points, maybe the two main points, subject to the discussion we will have. First, it seemed very important that after each review meeting of the convention, you have a synthesis in the form of a document that identifies the main conclusion of the plenary meeting, and with two purposes. First, to make the Commission aware of these conclusions so that the Commission can check whether a specific action has to be undertaken, and then to inform the staff about in which worldwide context they work. and what are the tendencies and problems. And the second conclusion is that we strongly encourage you, we know you do it also a lot, to continue to do peer reviews that allow you to have good basis for a continuous improvement approach.
Thank you. Any other?
I have nothing to add.
Yeah, okay. Okay, thank you, Philip. Thank you very much. I fully understand your comments, and it is quite helpful. Well, before the Fukushima Daiichi accident, I know we had a number of important comments in the review meeting, and also we participated the important discussion in international communities. And also IRSS in 2007, Nuclear Safety Commission and NISA, former regulatory body, had received a review done by IRRS. And for example, during the years of 2000 and 2001, we had a very active discussion about the continuous improvement in international communities, such as the CNRA of OECD or IAEA. And also during the 2007 IRS mission, we received the comments about the independence of the regulatory body. But before the Fukushima Daiichi accident, we had few change in our structure of our system, in our regulatory system. And so I repeatedly think about why we do not learn enough from the discussions in international communities. And one of the important things which appears in your comment, we need to have adequate activities after the review meeting. So after we are going to have a joint convention quite closely, but so we need to have a well-designed reporting system after the review meeting. So I think we would like to study about how to report and how to communicate among the staff members and the commission, what we learned from the review meeting. Well, and as for the IRS and Optimus, yes, as I told you, that we plan to have another IRS mission, and we experienced that IRS mission was a very good, very effective for improvements in improving regulatory body. So we keep participating, we keep receiving the IRS mission and the other mission from the IAEA. Please.
Yeah, well, thank you very much for your comment. I want to react to some things you said. I didn't say it in my presentation, but it's true that if you have some conclusion of a convention or result of an IRS mission, and you want to transform or change your organization or regulation or whatever, this is an argument that you can use. I mean, we've done it in France. I guess you've done it also to see, go and see the government and say, come on, we cannot stay like this. Look, the whole world is against what we are. So, you know, this is a political argument to promote some changes. However, I have to be also realistic. If you are in a country where the policy is against the change you are proposing, maybe because the forces that are represented are against this change, or it will be too disturbing for them to accept it, say, for example, for the industry. then you will not do it. I mean, you will not succeed. So all these peer reviews, they give you arguments. They might provide with an impulsion, but if you are against the policy of your country, I mean, I don't think you have a big chance to succeed. And on the other hand, if I remember the last IRS you had here, there were changes, including in your national policy after the IRS, which is a case where beforehand, the policy of the government was open to that type of change. But if it's not, it's not.
Yes, before the last IRS mission, first, unfortunately, we had Fukushima Daiichi nuclear accident. And after that, we had a nationwide controversy and discussions, and furious discussion occurred at the Diet as well. And after the new act, the NLA was created. So it's a big difference between the 2007 mission and the last mission. But we have to continue our efforts for the continuous improvement, and we still struggling to find a way to improve the regulations. So, well, thank you. Any other? Tanaka-san, do.
Very much for the good advice. So maybe you know we have the Joint Convention review meetings end of June and the beginning of July. So for this, we are going to try some new things you advised, such as the discussion and before that, and also after that, we discuss with the people in the secretariat how to respond to the commissioners. Okay, so this is a very good chance, I think so. So thank you very much.
Thank you. We already spent more time than we planned, but so any extra?
Well, I'd like to make a final comment.
Please.
I suspect this will be the last time we will see you officially as international advisors, given that you are stepping down in September. I don't think you're going to invite us back before then. And I just wanted to say that before you step down as the chairman, that it's been, for me, a very valuable experience to work with you and your colleagues in addressing some of the challenges, many challenges that you confront. Very much that have been helpful to you. But you've been very open in dealing with us. You've asked us a lot of important questions. I hope we've given you answers that are helpful. But at a personal level, I want to say it's been very enjoyable for me, and I'm sure my colleagues, to work with you. We look forward to continuing with Yamanaka-san as we go forward. But nonetheless, I didn't want to have this meeting end without expressing appreciation to you for making this a valuable experience for us.
Well, thank you very much. Well, I'm always I always enjoy working with you, communicate with you, and we had quite candid discussions about the variety of the difficult issues, but it was a great experience for me, as personally great experience for me, to receive the comments and advices from the international advisors, and also the system of the international advisor is inevitable of our difficult way to build public trust again. Thank you. Well, thank you very much for your important and valuable comments based on your rich experiences and your prudent considerations. They are definitely helpful for improving regulations of the NLA. And also, thank you very much for your difficult trip to come here even during the pandemic. Well, so let me close the meeting. Thank you very much.